All right, Bladesy, mate, thank you very much for doing this. I've been very excited to have you on all week. I finally got the other side of the '99 World Cup winning scrum on the podcast. So, mate, firstly, how are you? Where are you in the world at the moment, and what are you doing?
Yeah, mate. So big life change. I've moved up to the Hunter Valley, bought a place in Colburn, and it's a sort of 25 acres with accommodation on it. So we've it's up and running, and we've been busy painting and gardening, getting all the stuff ready to go, and so it's up and going. Place called Billabong Moon up here, and in the middle of the vineyards and stuff, and so loving it.
That's full time for you now, just running
Yeah,
the
full time.
property.
Yeah. So it's been super busy and really enjoying it. And then obviously just getting ready for the Christmas period with lots of people coming up. Nice and warm here at the moment, and but we've got a nice little pool and stuff on the place for people. So it's been great.
Yeah, so you're smack bang in the middle of wine country. Are you getting to explore much of the wineries while you're up there?
Mate, it's been a funny one. A lot of the neighbours have wineries. We're about the only one that doesn't. So visiting the neighbours is always very good. You get some nice wine and run into a lot of rugby people up here. We've got a bloke across the road who used to be a lot involved with a lot of rugby in Sydney. A bloke called Ian Napier, and actually went to a first sort of barbecue with all the neighbours and ran into a Angus Scott, an old Super Rugby prop who was at the Brumbies and various and the Force and stuff, and I coached him when he was at the Brumbies younger, so he ended up being my next door neighbour. So it's funny, like how you sort of you never get away from it.
No, mate, it follows you everywhere. And I saw they've got you doing some stuff with the wildfires as well. So you're keeping your hand in coaching a little bit while you're up there.
Yeah, trying to get down there sort of once a month and give a hand to the coach there. You obviously did some great work there last year with the front rowers, and obviously early season at the moment. A lot of blokes still not back there, but had a first session there last night and really enjoyed it.
No, yeah, it's a good bunch, mate. You'll enjoy the community as much as some of the players up there. I can't speak highly enough of the club. Mate, let's get more into the bones of the podcast. So I've had a fair bit to do with your brother Cam,
Yep.
and it's not very often that you get one Wallaby prop in the family, let alone two Wallaby props in the family. What was it like growing up with Cam? How did you guys help each other? How did you work out who was playing loosehead and who was playing tighthead
Yeah,
as well?
like
And what are your reflections on coming through the ranks together?
it's a really good one. So it's one of four boys, and I was second oldest. Cam's the youngest. So Cam copped all the crap, growing up. So he became the angry, serious one out of us, and I was lucky I got to choose position first, I guess, being the older one. So settled in at tighthead, and he came through and obviously, found his pathway on the other side of the scrum. For us, it was great, like growing up, being able to work with each other. We were very competitive with each other, which I think really helped me. I was lucky enough. You came through Southern Districts at a time where there was a lot of strong props, and it really helps when you got that healthy competition at club level.
Absolutely.
I came through at Gordon, not only with good scrum coach. We had Alec Evans there in my first couple of years, but we had a lot of really good props there in Mark Hartzler, who was a Wallaby at the time. Tony Daly was there for a few years. Cam and I, guy called Michael Spaulding. We had lots of really good props there, and so training was great. It was super competitive. You learn a lot there. You made a lot of mistakes there, which actually helped you on the weekend. So I think that was a big thing. And Cam and I became very competitive. Even at Wallaby training, blowing up, fighting with each other. When scrums collapsed. So Alec Evans was always egging that on in the background. So I think for us that was great, and we got to play one test together, which was awesome as well. Probably my favourite test of all time. I came off the bench, Cam started, and getting to have that moment and share your brother's test debut was awesome.
How there's some interesting points in there. How important is being around good competition to develop front rowers? I look back on my career, and the hardest scrums I ever had were second grade, playing for second grade versus first grade at training. Because we had guys like Dan Palmer, Nick Henderson, Guy Shepardson, James McCormack, just all guys that were at the very least Super Rugby or higher level. And throughout my entire playing career, I never scrummed harder than that. That was the hardest for me. And I think obviously I never made it to the levels that those guys made it to. But jumping into the coaching arena, I still look back on those days as quite formative for
Yeah,
me.
mate. It's so true. You need to learn those things and make your mistakes at training and learn how to cope with situations. I feel sorry for teams that, you go to a club, there's no one there that you can compete against, and you end up scrumming against the scrum machine the whole time. You get an effect out of that, but you don't get the same learnings. So very lucky to come through that system. And as you said, like world-class front rowers you had there to go against. You learn so much from then. You also had some fantastic hookers come through at that stage as well. Some really strong scrummaging back five players. So, those scrums at training would have been really competitive. And as you said, the great thing for me, especially scrumming against Cam all the time and how competitive we were, when you got into a Super Rugby game or a test match and something happened, you felt like you'd sort of seen it before and you knew how to adapt to it. So you didn't have to panic. You might have one crap scrum and then you adjust and you get on with it. So I think those learnings are really, really, really important. And getting young players to be able to scrum against players who are out of their class in a way at that point is really beneficial.
How important is the peer learning side of that? So obviously you had Alec Evans, who was coaching and who is, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the godfathers of scrum coaching in this country.
Yeah.
There's very few better, if anyone. But the peer learning side of that, particularly for young front rowers, how important is having someone like, Nick Henderson scrumming against you, giving you pointers as opposed to the coach giving you feedback?
I think it's really, really important because Alec was a great guy around mindset and mentality and all that sort of stuff, but he couldn't get in the scrum and feel whether your weight was good, whether you were pressuring him, what effect you were having, and if you release pressure at certain points of the scrum or were affected by things. So you don't get that. Having that ability where players can do that. I mean, I think the Waratahs last year, we lost Belly very early on in the season in that first game, and we were under the pump from an experience point of view, and blooding players having their debut. So having guys like Tetra Faulkner there, who's now doing some work with the Waratah scrum, who you could put into a scrum against guys and go, okay, I want you to give feedback when you do something. Let the player know, when you've got him, what's worked. So those sort of things are invaluable. And as a coach, I think you've got to try and create those situations where you can put those players in those learning abilities where they get feedback from each other, and getting a team to a point where they're willing to help each other in that point, is super important from my perspective as a coach.
Mate, well, I want to talk a bit more about coaching. Obviously, that's something that I'm particularly interested in. But I got to ask, the 11-year-old boy has to ask, that still dwells within me. What are your recollections of the '99 World Cup? Is there anything unusual that stands out for you? What are your reflections on that period of your life? Obviously, a lot of success and the triumph at the end, but yeah, can you give us some insight looking back?
Yeah, I guess weirdly, I suppose when I think back of it, I think probably 2 years before 97, when I was sort of in and out of the team, and we were struggling a fair bit. And when the Rod McQueen sort of came in and we made that move to having that base at Caloundra, that 2 year lead into the World Cup was incredible. Like living out of each other's pockets, getting that cohesion, just having those casual conversations, rather than force things at training. I think we got to that World Cup with a real affinity and a real understanding of each other, and that probably was the defining point from my point of view.
Yeah.
So, we got into that, and I think that probably reflected in the semi-final, which is for me probably the toughest game of footy that I've played. I was having some issues at that point with a nerve in my left arm, which was my binding arm, and we'd ended up sewing a seatbelt to the shorts of Foles' shorts so that I could hook my arm into it because I couldn't bind. But getting into that game, in the lead up in that week, our guys that didn't get picked, like we had really experienced squad, and the training session we had against them on the Wednesday, the opposed was one of the hardest training sessions I've done. I think they scored about 8 or 9 tries against us, but we got into that game against South Africa. It went into extra time, so we played 100 minutes, and it felt like you'd played the game before. It really, you got in that comfort zone where there was nothing there that you hadn't seen. My ass was hanging out. I sort of played the whole game, that one, and had Osterant for the first, at 135 for the first 80, and then Ollie LaRue at 135 for the last
bloody hell.
Yeah, I know. So it was but we were really comfortable in everything that went in that game, and it just felt like we'd been so well prepared by what that whole squad did for us. So that was, for me, the driving moment was that, and then that satisfaction. It was a real feeling after the thing, sitting in the change room. It was that just sitting there with your mates, that you spent all this time with, and realizing that all those things had paid off. It was just a massive relief and a real feeling. But for me, I think that defining moment was that semi-final, and just that, when we got pushed by the side that was probably the most informed there, that we just were in that comfort zone because we'd been so well prepared by our mates that we'd spent all that time with.
I could only imagine how good that beer after that game would have been, sitting in the change rooms. There would be none better. Mate, what was it like for you jumping from playing into coaching? Did you have any difficulties when you first started, or was it pretty seamless transition for you?
Look, the initial bits were pretty seamless. Like, I was very lucky, that I got sort of entered into coaching, not in a head coaching role, in a real technical side of things. So initially just as a scrum technical side, so helped a little bit with the Wallabies in the back end of the British Lions series. Went down to the Brumbies, spent a couple of years there doing their scrum technical work with them. That was a real comfort zone thing for me, where I knew a lot of the players. I played against them. I could still jump in and scrum against them, and just felt like a natural thing. The body wasn't working to run around the field at the moment, but I could still, still be in that situation there. So that for me was a really good transition. I think that the hard bit was taking the next step. I went to England as a forwards coach for Newcastle Falcons. Went there, was there for 3 weeks, and the owner sacked the head coach and didn't replace him, and just said, "Okay, off you go."
So you became the head coach just by default.
Yeah. We had a guy, Rob Andrew, who obviously was, very well known. He was the director of rugby, so he helped out a bit when he could be on the field. But for me, that was a massive step up, and I learned a lot in those first 2 years. And I think the big mistakes I made there initially, the biggest thing was I worked my ring off. Like, it was a 40-game season for those guys at that stage, and I think I tried to pass on every bit of information I had about the opposition and do all that stuff, rather than focus on the things that make a difference. And I think that was the biggest thing I learned in those first 2 years. It is an evolution of me coaching was to focus on the basics and focus on the things that were going to make a difference. And it was all right for me to know everything about the opposition that was coming up and what might work against them, but just focusing on what each player needed to do get their job done, and be content with holding information to myself that others didn't need to know, rather than feeling, "Oh, shit, I've told everyone how hard I worked." I think that was the biggest change for me, was getting that click across to.
Have you seen that mistake a lot with young coaches?
Yes, yeah, a lot. You see the meeting fests and the 45-minute meetings where they go over every play that the opposition's ever played, and go through that, and players switch off. The biggest thing you also see is coaches, and it's a natural thing. Coaches now, a lot of them are getting paid and they're under pressure for performance, and they try and take total control of all the information and all the calling and everything. And unfortunately, what they realise after a while is the players don't take ownership then of the victories and the other things. They'd be happy to take ownership of the victories, but probably when things aren't going wrong, they don't feel confident to play and adapt on the field, and they probably don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. So for me, that was the biggest learning thing, and that's the biggest thing you see with coaches who are enthusiastic. They're working their rings off, and they find all this information and they want to pass it on.
Going back to that Newcastle period, did you have anyone to help you through that time in terms of mentors or someone to bounce ideas off?
Yeah.
Did
Look,
you have anyone?
I had Rob Andrew, but he was a very old school, coach at that stage, and probably not that experienced as an actual coach. I guess there were other guys over there. Rod Kafer was with Leicester for a while. We used to catch up and chat about things. I learned a lot from Rod around how he was assessing opposition and the information he was giving. Funnily enough, at the same time, Michael Foley was in the same situation as me at Bath, and he was over there, and he had a really tough first year there. Probably similar situation to me, learning on the run. And we had some great conversations. He actually had John Connolly, Knuckles, who we both played under. I'd had a year up there in Queensland with, and we both played underneath. And Foles said to me, Knuckles came, watched his first 3 coaching sessions, and then got him behind, sat down with him and had these 2 pages of information that Foles had, and said, pick 3 things out of that and only talk about those 3 things for the rest of the week. Forget about all the rest of it. And I think, and he said once he took that on, he took that philosophy on, things really changed there for him. So little things like that, really helped me, just, I guess, talking to those guys, at that time, and learning off each other. And I was lucky enough, our captain there was Johnny Wilkinson, so he was coming in and out of the England squad, and being able to sit down with him and talk about stuff. And then we had a few experienced internationals come from other places. So we had a couple of guys come from New Zealand, a guy called Mark Mayhoffler, who was an All Black centre.
Absolutely.
We ended up becoming really great mates. He was a really good older guy to bounce ideas off. And then Mark Andrews come from South Africa, just finished, with the South African side, and come over and play with us and bounce ideas off him, and then sort of try and take what worked for you out of those things. So yeah, definitely had some really good learning experiences when I was there.
The reason I ask is because I think it's pretty important certainly I'm a young coach, and having guys to bounce ideas off has been just invaluable for me. And I can imagine you during that period, which would have been, I can only imagine how stressful that would have been, to be able to share experience with Foles, or to have someone like John Conley just to give you a couple of pointers or to help you clarify your thinking would have been invaluable.
Yeah, it is, because at that point there, it was promotion relegation. So when I took over coaching the team, we were 6 points off last, and looking relegation square in the face in my first coaching experience, and managed to claw our way out of that with about 3 games to go in the season. Be safe, and so, yeah, learning that thing, being under that pressure and trying to sort of learn at the same time was incredible. So having those people to bounce ideas off, even though we were competing against each other, we were mates, and we'd come through a system. So you're bouncing ideas off each other, and we actually ended up playing Foles in the last game of the season, and if we'd beaten them, they would have got relegated. So it was a weird situation. We didn't deliberately lose that, but we played crap. So,
Yeah.
so we saved them from relegation that year.
Mate, something you mentioned before is about the importance of having players who are leading on the field, or from
Yeah.
coaches that coach too much, you sort of lose the leadership on the field. How can we as coaches help create those leaders? Have you had any tactics? Are there any strategies that you've used to create, a scrum leader at the Waratahs? Or
Yeah.
can you talk
Look,
about that a little bit?
yeah, I think there's two things for that. I didn't realise it until many years after I'd finished playing that when Rod McQueen came and took over as the Wallabies coach, he had a lot of players there with high rugby IQ, and he made us sit down. We'd always been talked at by coaches, or just there wasn't that much rugby analysis, there wasn't that much video, there wasn't really analysis systems in place at that time, so we'd really gotten past in the past by teams not knowing anything about you, and you'd turn up and you'd just play stuff. And it was just getting to that starting point of where you were actually watching the opposition were watching you. He came up with a really simple thing of let's start from a point that we're the opposition watching us. What would you do against us? And let's start our thinking from that point of view. And then his first thing he started was an old school like business SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
And we all thought it was a load of crap. We didn't understand why we'd have to sit through this. And we thought, Rod doesn't understand rugby, so he's enough. So he's getting us to do all these things. There was all that talk in the background. We got on with it and did it. What he basically did to the team was get everyone to think through the game, get everyone to get on the same page, understand why we were going into a game with a certain tactics, thinking the opposition would play a certain way, but also understanding that if they didn't play that way, that we knew why we were playing that way and could easily adapt on the field. And so we as a group, took great ownership of the feeling that we were in control of what we were doing on the park. Again, at the time, a lot of the players went, Rod's just trying to get us to do the work for him. But, 10 years down the line, when you get into coaching or business and stuff yourself, you realise actually what he did was create a simple system that enabled us to have a way that we thought about the game and came up with reasons that did those things. So for me, that was a really important way. It's bloody hard as a coach when you're responsible for results to have the trust to do that yourself and to give that away. So definitely it's something that it took me a long time. So when I went to Newcastle, I was guilty of doing too much myself, and it took me probably to halfway through my second year there to start getting players to actually take responsibility for things. I was very lucky when I came back and worked with the Wallabies that I had some guys like Nathan Sharp and stuff there that were real students of the game, and they would look at things like the line out and stuff and really study the opposition. So they, was facilitating them and finding the information for them to make it easy for them, but really just trying to lead them on the way of having those things, where they had prepped in their mind, okay, this is a couple of ways the opposition might defend. These are the calls that are going to use against them. So they're not trying to think on the field. They've already done that processing off the field. So for me, that became super important, having those leaders. Sometimes you don't have a lot of them developed, so it is a longer thing to develop them.
I was just going to ask, pardon me, just in regards to scrummaging, how would you begin to create some leadership around scrummaging? Because it's something, particularly with this generation. I mean, there's some smart guys around, but it's a lot younger than perhaps back in the day where you had your Nathan Sharps who were in around the team who could bring the IQ up. But yeah, what sort of strategies do you use to create leaders or to increase rugby IQ around scrummaging?
I guess if I took an example of the couple of years I had at the Waratahs recently, I went into the situation. The feedback I had when I started was they want you to really lead it. They've had to fend for themselves for a couple of years to a degree. So they want you to lead it initially. and then slowly give back the leadership to them. So that was a pretty easy way. So I just went in, started working with the guys. I think my initial thing was just trying to see what made the players tick, see who the natural leaders were in the group. And then from that point, initially start leadership by asking them to scrum against each other, and then come up and, at the end of the set of scrums, talk about what worked and what didn't with what the opposition did against them, and have those little chats around what they thought, the player did that was effective. So that was the initial bit. And then I worked out sort of after a while who the natural sort of leaders were. There were guys that wanted to take responsibility, and you get that some players who are that want to talk, but talking might be masking the fact that they're lacking a bit of confidence. But you also get the other ones that say not the right things, but say things that are about what's actually going to help on the field. So yeah, just trying to find those guys. I think the most difficult thing I have is you have some of the Pacific Islander guys that you have in a group. They have that great respect for their elder, more experienced players, and sometimes they won't give an opinion. So, and it can be quite hard to get them to come out of their shell, and often they've got very good IQ, but they're holding it internally, and they're worried about what people will think about them if they come out and say something. So trying to get them to come out of their shell, because I think the big thing is, say if you've got a player as a hooker, and you get into a situation where something's happened, a team's hitting and shifting left or doing something on you, and the hooker's got to take control. If the hooker's not prepared to talk to his props, and then the props start thinking, they start working on their own, and you get that breakdown of the core of the scrum. I think, trying to get those players to come out of their shell and realise that if everyone's on the same page, it's not really a mistake. It's just making sure that you come up with a way. And I think what we tried to do as a group there, I guess, as an example, was work through issues that we might have. That may be a team on the bind taking that shift left, a team trying to isolate our tight head, a team with a very strong loose head who might be really stepping around the corner, a team who might be playing around on the bind with varying pressure, trying to milk free kicks from the referee, and just go, okay, if we hit that situation, what's our go-to? If we hit that situation, what's our go-to? And we can go straight to those situations, and having the players work through those scenarios and come up with a solution they're happy with, and that they've worked at training, and they're comfortable that they were able to solve that to a degree, I think was important as well.
So would you do that just as front rowers, and you go, all right, guys, we're getting this front row to offset to the left and drive at a 11 o'clock angle?
Yeah.
What are you guys going to do to fix it?
Yeah, would you get that generally just as a front row group and do that? I mean, you didn't want the back five to start thinking that they were, doing things. You want them to stay connected. I think the big parts of around back row stuff were more what things are going to make a difference, and that might be, okay, if you're the right hand flanker and you see that opposition loose head shifting left and changing angle, what do you do to help your tight head in that situation? What information might a 9 or a flanker give? Ask questions, the right questions to a referee to point out a hinging prop or a prop that's changing bind or something like that. Just key things that they can say to without pissing the referee off.
Yeah.
But just to make a point. And then for me, I think a neglected part of scrummaging is that feed, strike, delivery, combination, skill set. Most of the time you split backs and forwards to train at the same time, and the backs don't want their half backs to come across, and the forwards want everyone there, and so it's often hard to get that time where they spend getting those quality combinations. So for me, super important. Those combinations are there, and that the back five don't need to know all of that other detail. They just need to know those things that are important to them.
This is probably a long-winded question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you begin to build a dominant scrum? I think from what I've seen, there's a bunch of teams that can hit and hold, win their own ball nice and clean. I don't think that's that difficult to achieve now because a lot of teams are doing it. And from what I've seen, the way referees are refereeing the scrum, particularly in the World Cup, even teams that are getting dominance, the ref's still saying to use it. So it's I think that's changed things a little bit. But to build a dominant scrum, how would you attack it? How do you begin?
I guess that's a really good point. So I try and look at sort of probably three key things that I want to try and evaluate around the team and see where they're up to. And probably the first one's mindset. I want to see that the players who are going to be involved in that have got the right mindset, that on back five's going to fight until the ball's out of the scrum each time, that they're not going to hit and be so panicky about missing the timing of their release in defence that they're not actually watching the ball through the scrum. So it's giving them, okay, so if you're the right hand flanker and you know that you might be playing an 8 and a 9 that like to run, especially close to the line, how can I get you to concentrate on the scrum long enough? And it might just be giving them the cues that if you're taking your shoulder off and looking over the top of the scrum, you're either going to get penalised for being offside and disengaged early, or our scrum's going to get shafted.
Yeah.
Watch the ball through the scrum, and you're going to see that ball at the feet, and when the halfback gets his hands on it or the 8 gets his hands on it, you're going to get your timing off that. So in the meantime, you stay there. So it's that I want to see one that they've got a mindset around scrummaging, that you're not always going to be comfortable. A lot of props want to feel comfortable, and they'll shift their position if they're not comfortable. And sometimes you just got to be in uncomfortable positions to make the scrum work. So that's one thing. The second thing is to build that skill set to allow them that. So to show them shape, to show them a pushing plane that works. Feet adjustment, when to do that at the right time. All those things that make up the skill set of being a prop. How to bind, how to get yourself in a position where you don't put yourself under pressure. And then the third one is making sure that they've got the physical capability of doing those things. So you want players that are going to train consistently. You get a lot of players that go real hard, break down, fall apart, go real hard, break down, fall apart, and they don't get that consistency of training. I just want players that are going to get there, build, and be there. We had one season when I was with the Waratahs that we couldn't do a live scrum until mid-January between injuries from Wallaby stuff and guys busting ass, doing stuff before they were ready, and we just didn't build that consistency into it. So I think they're the things there, and then on the back of that you can build tactics. It's easy to build tactics when you've got a good base. When you've got players that can be strong, low, and square, and they've got an ability to engage consistently into a strong position. Once they've got that, you can build stuff on the top of it, but there's no point building tactics there. As to your second part of your question around that, how do you build that dominant scrum? I agree with you that I think one area referees have gotten better is they didn't want to reward that scrum that just gets in, plays a quick channel to number 8 and then just walks left, creates a picture of movement and expects the referee to put an arm up because they're pretending that they've created dominance just by shifting left and hopefully getting the opposition loose head to change angle because he's trying to chase you across, and you get that picture. So I think they've been better off at wanting that tight head to actually shift forward to create that movement first, not wanting the hooker just to stand up and put his hands in the air and go, oh, look, I've been dominant. So I think they are getting better at recognising that. So for me, I just think, getting our mentality that we set up around our hooker and tight head really put a lot of pressure through that position there. Set our loose head up where he can be in front and actually engage with his opposition tight head. Not be hanging out the side and just feeling like he's
tucking in behind.
Yeah, or tucking in behind where he can't do anything. I think you want him to understand how he can help, build that pressure. And once he feels the pressure go, then he can go to town on the opposition. So for me, I think that's the ones that are having success at the moment. South Africa were able to do that. Last World Cup they got away with this, their tight head turning sideways and going in. This World Cup they were able to shift right, they were able to shift left, they were able to drive straight through. They'd really evolved, and a couple of their props were a lot better than they were, even though they dominated in the previous World Cup. But they showed they were able to shift with the way that the game's being refereed.
The mindset side of things, I completely agree with everything that you just said. But the mindset side of things is really interesting to me, because I think from my observations, I think if your scrum's important to the team, the head coach values the scrum, and the players value having a dominant scrum, that's a good part of the battle already won. How have you ever been in a team where you maybe walked in and the scrum wasn't that important? And had to change it. How did you? And
sometimes you don't, because you walk in as an assistant coach and you just want to jump on the back of, do what the head coach tells you, jump in, do your time and go. I think 2004, when I was working with the Wallabies, we had a very successful season. That domestic season, we were 6 from 8. We beat the All Blacks and the Springboks at home, but we should have beaten the Springboks away that year, and we played really poorly in our last game. And I always look back on that of going, I should have pushed harder around the scrum side of things. When I look back at that game, it still ekes away at me now, in terms of we became very, very efficient we were 100%. We had a very, very good backline. Our goal was just to we called it kunda ball, which was a Japanese sort of word that Eddie had come through with. I don't even know what the meaning was, but we wanted to be the best team at basically striking, channeling, and being able to use ball around the park. And we were very, very good at that. Where we struggled was more that, because we were doing that all the time and we were 100% in most games, when the opposition held the ball in and something happened, the scrum collapsed or whatever, we'd never showed any dominance. So we hadn't created a picture of dominance in the referee's mind. So often those 50-50s went against you. So I think getting to that point where you strike that balance, I think for a while we went too far. In Australia, we actually said, okay, we want to now try and get back to a point, where everyone in the world saying that we just don't scrum aggressively. We basically scrum as a delivery platform. So, they're all talking to the referees saying that Australia is not scrummaging dominantly. So, then we went through a period around that 2015 where we really held the ball in. We tried to create those pictures of dominance. We got some things there. We probably lost out in terms of some really good play opportunities off scrums in attack at the same time. But I think that to your point, I think working with a coach and a coaching group to go, okay, where are the points in the game where we want to show that picture of dominance, so that when something happens, we can actually get rewarded for that. And then at other times we can actually go, okay, now here's a time where we really want to play. We've got their back row staying on the scrum. We've got them scrummaging. They might be one down in the backs with a sin bin or something like that, and we've got to play. So, having that ability to do both, I think one of the big things, creating a nice picture early, identifying those situations where the opposition like to have the back row pressuring. So it can be when you're exiting from your own 22 and you know that their back row is going to be trying to fly at you, at your kickers. So one where a lot of teams use that dominance to get a penalty out of that scrum, be able to kick the ball out down and halfway on your feet, and now you suddenly take defence into attack. The scrum's got to be a weapon in that sense. So I think creating that mentality when the players understand that. As I say, the favourite thing I always have is, we've got to fight till the ball's in flight, and everyone's got to have that attitude from 1 to 8. And if you don't do that, and every action you have in the scrum has an effect on the next one. So if you're lazy in your setup, it affects your bind. If you're lazy in your bind, it affects your hit. If you get a crap hit, you can't load your weight forward properly. So and then you don't have power, and it affects everything else. So I like to have a system where the players look at each step and how it affects the next one. So we perfect our setup, and the front row do extra setups in the gym and when they're together. So we've got that done. We do work on our bind. So when we do analysis, it's the same thing. We look up, did we get our setup right? Did we get our bind right? Did we get our hit right? Did we load post hit? Did we power on? Where did it break down? And where do we fix things?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, mate. I love that. Pardon me, mate. Just wanted to ask, about the physical side of it and getting people conditioned for scrummaging. Obviously, there's a gym element at play, and you've got guys like Angus Bell or Taniela Tupou who are very strong athletes. What about from an actual scrummaging conditioning side of things? How do you get guys appropriately conditioned to scrummage in a dominant manner? And what's the minimum effective dose, I guess? Like what would your ideal week be? 2 times, 3 times? How do you look at that?
I think the thing for me is I think you always want to have one hard scrum session a week. You can't always do it with injuries and stuff, but you want to have one hard one. And my preference is that's live, and if you're going Saturday to Saturday, that's probably your Tuesday type day. And in that day, it can depend, the volume can depend on the amount of load you've been able to create in the preseason. So what the players are conditioned to. If you've got a lot of players who've missed a lot of off-season, returning from injuries, it's hard to load them. They get through a game and they're not recovering to the next one, and they're trying to load. You might have injury history stuff. So it's probably it's never a perfect scenario. I guess if we looked at the Waratahs, say, when we had Tet with his sort of ankle issues, mid-30s prop, could probably cope with one session a week, and then you had to do that early enough for him to recover in time for the game. You had Harry Johnson-Holmes, Achilles tear, belly with his toe. So you got a load of guys that hadn't had a big load building into the season. So you got to try and modify their load, but then you got, from a team perspective, you got to get the load into the rest of the group. So often you're bringing a little bit more scrum machine than you'd normally like into it. My feel is you want the players to feel confident. So I always want at least one feed and delivery session during the week, and one live one, and then probably one technical stuff where you can actually go through that, problem solving. Let's look at what the opposition, mimic what the opposition we're doing this week might do. Are we all comfortable with where we're going to set up? They might like to set close. You might have a team like the Rebels or the Force that will occasionally change their bind pressure or pull a little bit on the bind. And you've got to get used to getting really disciplined in your bind and setup process, so you don't put any weight early and fall into that trap of getting pulled into an early engagement. But at the same time, you don't end up sitting on your heels worrying about it, and then they dominate the engagement, the other way. So I think it's getting players comfortable with those situations, allowing them to experience varying levels of pressure of the bind and what works, and how you might change that during the game to adapt to the opposition. So I know that's a bit all over the place, but I guess off season you're wanting, when you're not playing, you're wanting 2 hard sessions a week. When you're into
Yep.
the season, I would say the volume you're looking at is we end up doing sort of sets of 3 where you go just to bind for a scrum, just to set and build
Yep.
and load for one, and then a full delivery.
Yep.
Then break up, quickly fix anything, make any swaps around, go into another set of 3. Try and do 3 to 4 sets of those 3s on a Tuesday on the back of a technical session.
Yeah.
And then on the Thursday, depending on if it was a 6 or 7 day week or when your lead into your game was, if we wanted to do lives again there, it would just be really more, we might do it in a team situation where you're feeding and delivering off that situation. I always like to do one where you go to field position. So we might go, okay, where are our pinch points? Okay, we're now going to scrum, set a scrum on our 15 meters in from touch on our left-hand side inside our 22. We know the opposition is coming at you here. They can punch you into the sideline. What are we going to do here on this ball? How are we going to get it out? Let's practice that. Those just situational ones is the second part. So, I guess there is a little bit of variation. For me, the key thing is trying to build that load into the season so you can cope with being able to do lives in the week to learn, as well as getting your game
Mate,
loaded.
I appreciate that, mate. You're validating the scrum conditioning work I'm doing with the uni boys at the moment. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And the boys don't like it, before Christmas, getting in there and doing 30-second holds or 5 sets of bloody sink and shoves. It's not the prettiest thing you ever do, and the season's a long way away. But for me, it's that consistency. You just build consistency, you build load. So the gym stuff's super important, but there's some stuff that just you got to get into that low. You got to get into that in that low position. It's hard to mimic it elsewhere. You can try and mimic it. You got to feel those rotational forces that are hard to replicate, and just learn how to cope with those and stay in position, and at the same time keep your feet pushed into the ground and only move when you need to. It's hard to replicate that in the gym as well. So all those things you've just got to do. Yeah. And if you don't do them, they come back to haunt you in the season.
I got a bit of a theory that I could teach my mum how to hold body shape on her own, but then if you add 8 opposition, 7 people behind you, you got to play rugby for 80 minutes, run the heat. It becomes very difficult to do. So I think I couldn't agree with you more.
Mike Cron came up with a great word, and I like to think of it is that is a lot of players are massive in the gym. Then you get them one-on-one in a thing, and they're unbelievable in that. And you put them in an 8-on-8, and something disappears out of it for some reason. And he used to call it social loafing. It's that sort of comfort factor of having 7 other people around you working, that all of a sudden you go, well, someone else will do my job for me. So for me, that's why I always put that mentality, that mindset at number 1, is that we've all got to want to work and not go, not say like I'm a front row, my head coach is an attacking coach, so he's only really looking at my run. So I'm gonna save a bit of energy around scrum time and charge around the field and do a couple of runs. And if it's or you might get a lock who's gets a pretty uncomfortable on the ears and the head in that second row position at times, and he's worrying about his line out and stuff. I think you just got to get that 8-man mentality that everyone's got a role to do in the scrum, and we've all got to fight each scrum, because it creates a mindset on the opposition as well in the game. If they're under pressure there, it creates a mindset of that you're playing okay in the referee's head. It gives you guys confidence, all those sort of things that add on to the rest of the game.
And from an opposition point of view, if your scrum's getting dominated, that's all you really think about as a front row for the rest of the day, and the rest of your game goes to shit from my experience.
Exactly. You see guys running around with their head down, and you see that sometimes with hookers as well. They have one bad throw, or it's not even their fault. It's, a bloke's missed his timing or missed his lift, or they've jumped in a different spacing, and that stuffs up the line out, and that hooker runs around shaking his head for the next 5 minutes, and gets to the next scrum, hasn't focused on his balance or his bind and stuffs that up, and loads onto the next thing and drops a ball, the next carry, and it just builds in. So I think yeah, that mindset's so important.
Mate, I've got so many questions that I want to ask, but I'm very conscious of your time. So I've just got a couple more.
Yeah.
What is the difference between shoot shield and super rugby? And how can guys like me who are trying to create the next generation of Waratahs and Wallabies, what can we do to help that process?
Yeah. Oh, look, I think it's a good point. So the difference probably between shoot shield and super rugby is the volume of core training the guys are getting. You get a guy that's been training full time in the role for 2 or 3 years. His cores, he's probably had a little bit more experience of scrummaging against harder people, but the basics don't change at all. And I think definitely been guilty at it, and myself as a coach, and seen players believe it, that when they get to that level that you don't need to work hard anymore. You've done the hard work, and now it's about, okay, let's play with this, and let's do this, and let's do that, and they're not doing the non-negotiables each week of time under tension, plane of movement, hit pattern of body shape and bind on the setup. Those things don't change anywhere. I think what the shoot shield guys need is probably an overload early of that stuff, of that experiential learning that they may not have had to get them up to speed. So the more that they can be in that position where they're getting slightly rotated, and they work out how to find shape from that. They work out if a player's trying to get them to move their inside foot, by the way a tight head might drive slightly out at 1 o'clock, with trying to get out across underneath the loose head to get them to shift that inside foot to open up that channel, that seam between him and the hooker, to get the feeling of, okay, when that weight's coming down, how do I just stay glued to my hooker and be patient and let the tight head sort of stuff himself up by a changing angle. Those sort of things you only get by just chipping away at those things. So for me, I would say for everyone, it's the basics of that stuff. Drilling body position, drilling how do I get from my bind position into my engagement into a powerful position, and build confidence in that. I think probably at that shoot shield level, you're going to do more building confidence, where you go 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, build, okay, we've got into breaking point. Now we go back, fix it up, build them back up, and just keep making those progressions. It might be quicker at Super Rugby level for the guys to do, okay, here's a real quick one. Now we're straight into 5-on-5 or 8-on-8 or 6-on-6, and because they've already got that real base. But you still got to tick it over.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, because I've seen guys go from the shoot shield to Super Rugby and then onto the Wallabies and thrive, but it's not that common. It's not that common, and I feel like it's important for guys in the shoot shield to have an understanding of what's required to create Super Rugby level front rowers, second rowers, so that we can do our part in that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you look at that and you go, what are the guys going to Super Rugby level for? Like, what's got them picked at that level?
Yeah.
And they're coming from different areas. So they might be a young guy who's got promise, and he gets into a Super Rugby squad, and then there's injuries, and because of the rules, you've got to push him through before he's really ready. And you see those guys, sometimes they don't really cope. Then you see guys like Shoddy and these guys that have come through a tough scrummaging club like Southerns, and they've scrummed hard at training. They've had a scrum mentality at training, and they get down to the Brumbies. They're comfortable in a situation because Palms is there and stuff, and then they can scrum well at that level straight away, and then go straight into a World Cup squad at the end of pretty much your first season. So, you see guys like that be able to cope just because of the work that they've done at that shoot shield level and below, and the situation they've been in. I think that's the things, and I guess people get a misunderstanding of the way Super Rugby works, in that you're allowed to contract a certain amount of players. You've got to have a balance of guys for the future and guys for now, and sometimes you do get caught with pushing guys through before they're ready, and they go on the field and people go, why aren't you picking that bloke, from who's been good in club level, and you're actually not allowed to. But as well as part of their learning process, you don't want them having to learn at Super Rugby level and get found out, because often then it takes them a year or two mentally to recover from that. But I think that the thing for me is that shoot shield, you want that competition at training, you want those tough sessions. Then you find out the guys with the right mindset who can take the next step easily.
Mate, couple more. What are some common mistakes that you see from young scrum coaches?
I think trying to, I've sort of alluded to it a couple of times before, but I think trying to get to introduce like massive tactics before the blokes can actually get their base right.
Would you even consider tactics before you get the base right, even at shoot shield level? I
consider like the tactics of problem solving, of saying, okay, you might have a prop that's not super strong yet, and you're getting him a little bit more extended on the bind, a little bit more lean, because you don't want him to get caught in that position that he's not strong at 90 degrees, because he hasn't done the work yet in the gym. So you might be compensating a little bit there, but then opposition recognise that and release the weight on the bind, or don't go across the space. So you got to sort of have that. I guess it's probably not a tactic, but have that, build that, the
IQ.
that kit in his toolbox of how he copes with that. I would focus on those things. Once you can get your feed, your channel right, and your shape right, then you start building in the tactics on the back of that. I think you do get a lot of coaches that are very good tactically in their own time, and they want to, they get a coaching position and they want to go in and go, okay, I want to show the players all the stuff that I can do, straight away.
Yeah.
You got to put that you got to put that ego in the in the back shelf and go, okay, I've got to find out what these blokes can do mentally, what they can do, build that base, and then once I've got a really good base, you can do anything off the back of it.
You talked briefly about the process or the system that you use. I think that's probably a good thing to maybe finish the podcast on, just for young scrum coaches to understand the importance of how to get everyone in the scrum on the same page. Could you just maybe go into a little bit more detail about the system and why that's important?
Yeah, I guess if I was looking at where I want to finish up on the engagement, so if I start there as a starting point and go, if I'm looking sideways at a scrum, I want that basically that thigh angle when we hit the opposition to be at that roughly that 1 o'clock. If you're looking at a clock face, I want that the studs, those front 6 studs, buried into the ground. I want a flat line between the hip and the shoulder. So if I go, okay, if that's where I want to get to, what's my system to get there? Obviously, we've got the breakfoot law with the hooker now, but to get to that point with the front rowers, I want them to be able to be comfortable at being at a 12 o'clock thigh angle when they get the bind. Yeah. So to start that, I want to make sure that there's some real basic principles that hips, shoulders, square facing the opposition all the time. So we've got that power position. That's from that point of view, we're basically when we get into our crouch position, that our knee is in front of our toe, so we're not sitting back on our heel. So that's a real simple thing. So we're looking at our setup there. there's various ways to set up. Does your hooker bind to your loose head, or does your hooker bind to your tight head first, and how does that affect the scrum? But the key thing for me is I don't want the hooker binding to the loose head and then moving away from him and dragging the loose head, shoulders sideways and leaving his hips across. So I want the loose head to be nice and feel nice and square.
Yeah.
So anything those little things about setup is super important. So getting that knee hip angle right on the setup is super important for me, and that balance, and getting that connection when we start our bind process, getting that back five shoulder connection, so their ear and the point of their shoulders are connected to the blokes in front of them and they're working through them. That's the key thing for me. Then the second bit of the process is how do we bind to the opposition so that we don't compromise ourselves, so the tight head doesn't lift his right shoulder, that the loose head doesn't get twisted, and release the weight on that inside of his body and lose that connection to his hooker. So we just get that bind process right, and then from that point, how are we engaging from that point? So what's our process of sinking into our feet and driving our chest through so we achieve that 1 o'clock angle there. Once we can get that, then we talk about, I know they talk about not pushing before the ball comes in, but we've got to load pressure on the opposition to maintain a strong body position. And my key, I try to always say to players, if you look through at the opposition's feet all the time and you're basically trying to touch your sternum onto their toes, you're going to be pushing in the right direction. If you're driving your chest through in that shape there, so you're loading there, then how do we create power? So we don't just sink our knees and our shoulders lift. We drive our chest through and we open our knees slightly so our hips turn on to get that power through. And then at what point do we move our feet? So you get a lot of guys who want to move their feet as soon as they engage because they're trying to get comfortable or trying to create movement in the scrum. But your movement's always got to come through your chest and your hips. And as soon as you feel that movement and you feel your studs start to lift out of the ground, then you've got to move your feet before you get up onto the real nose of your toes and you pancake out. So and there's a point of no return with that, where you get too far with your locks pressure on and behind you, that any step you make is going to be too long. You're going to rotate and you're going to lose your feet. So for me, it's that. It's get the principles of the setup, gets the principles of the bind, principles of the hit, how you load, how you power through, and how you chase. Just those little steps for me are the key to scrummaging. And if I'm a coach, I want to stand beside the scrum and go, okay, where's our weight on that setup? How are we looking? When we get into our crouch, are we at our thighs at 12? Have we got a nice strong bind position? On that bind, do we shift back or do we maintain our balance? Do the back five put that slight connection on at the right time, so that when we engage, we're engaging as 8. When we hit, I always like to say to the players, when you engage, you should feel like the studs are pushing through the base of your boots, not that you've come up onto your toes. So if you've got that feeling, that you feel there when you engage, that we call it, it's hard to describe to players, but I like to call it a heavy hit. That you hit, when you hit it, the opposition feels like, geez, that's a heavy scrum. Not necessarily that you've dived across the space and beaten them up to that space, but geez, they feel heavy. Yeah. And it's that, you've got your feet in the ground, you're loaded up, and all the weight's on, that you're nice and stable.
Mate, there's some really good stuff in that. And I as I've gotten into coaching and traveling around and going to do juniors and local clubs, and I think that aspect of getting all 8 on the same page is probably something we could do a lot better in this country.
Yeah.
From, I think, maybe below the professional level.
Yeah, I know this is probably a weird thing to say, but I had a coach do a session with us when I was quite young, and it was a timing session. And so I've seen Mike Cron do all these little exercises around timing, and with his little hand exercises, and showing that often often when you just rely on a call system and everything, or you don't call, that players do things in different times. One of the best sessions I've had in terms of progressing stuff is basically getting players into a scrum machine and then having them, the back five, close their eyes and on the call just feel the movement of the front rows in front of them and just work through on that feel of that movement and just do that repetitions of that. Hard to do the eyes closed in live sessions because there's too many other variations, but just you actually often get a good result of getting players working in timing together and doing the same things at the same time when you take one of those senses out of it. And you can see, you often will look as a coach and you look at the side of the scrum, you'll see probably sometimes your hardest working lock is just getting something slightly wrong. He might be sinking his knees and driving his shoulders up, and he's actually lifting his tight head's, base out of the ground and driving him up onto his toes and lifting his hips higher than his shoulders and actually stuffing his own front row up. So just seeing that those guys are actually working with each other and helping each other out is super important.
Mate, fantastic. Couple of rapid fire ones for you, mate, and then I'll let you get back to your farm. And
you're right, mate.
Do you have any books, documentaries, podcasts, anything that you'd recommend that people listen to, watch, even just for entertainment?
Yeah, look, I mean, funny enough for me, the podcast I'm listening to at the moment has got nothing to do with rugby. It's called Hosting with Heart. It's about basically running a place where you want people to come in and have a good experience.
Yeah.
For me, we run books. The last book I read actually was a really interesting one. I had the fascination about coaches that last a long time and have that, don't just be successful once and rely on that. They've just got this internal drive and basically reading a book called read a book called The Education of a Coach, a Bill Belichick one, one of these NFL ones. And there's a lot of typical NFL bullshit, talk up in it. But the background of it is just this sheer doggedness of a bloke to become the best at his craft, to learn, just keep at it. And when he got good, he just went, oh, well, that's good, but I now want to do this and I now want to do that. And it took me a long time in my rugby career to create that mentality. And it actually took missing out on a team in the year of the World Cup. So I'd had a good year in 98, started 99. Jeff Miller sat me down and I wasn't getting picked in the first test. And I said, oh, why? And he said, oh, I got you to write down what your ambition was. And he said, I wanted to be respected. I wasn't the biggest prop in the world, whatever, but I just wanted to be respected by the opposition and by my teammates and whatever. And he said, you never mentioned about wanting to be the best. And I was worried about that. And he said, I want you to go away and think about wanting to be the best. I'm worried that you're potentially the best scrummager in Australia, but you're satisfied now you're part of the team and you just want it. And it hurt for 3 or 4 tests when I wasn't playing, but it changed the way I was thinking about it. And it's something that I've always thought about since then of never sort of sitting on your heels and going, okay, I've done that now. I've always wanted to try and move forward and get better at something and sort of look for, not trying to reinvent the wheel all the time, but look at, okay, what's this guy doing and what this person's doing that's working well, and what do we take out of that to actually try and make ourselves better.
That's fantastic coaching, by the way.
Oh, well, it's sort of the key to it, and that's why I wanted to read this guy's article, because it was just that all the time of just not living, never being satisfied with where you're at, of really trying to push along. And I think that for me is the thing, and you've always got to go back, focus on the basics, and then not be satisfied around that side of things.
Who's the best prop you ever played against?
Oliver Brown was the best, probably. He was an All Black tighthead. I was very uncomfortable. I was playing loose head, which I hadn't played a lot of in test matches, but he was just a guy that was ahead of his time. Like, he could scrum an inch off the ground, you release pressure on him and hope he's going to collapse. And it was in the days where your knee could touch, but as long as you fought and got straight back off the ground, you're all right. And you think, oh, well, I've put him to deck. It's all right. I've survived this one. And he just lift you back up and just keep motoring on. And he was unbelievably good. I think then learning how to cope with the big guys. I alluded to earlier, you play in South Africa, you got a massive pack. You got 8 blokes over 120 kilos and, enormous weight, and just the real challenge of learning how to nullify or beat them at scrum time was for me a real joy around playing the game.
What makes a good coach?
I think someone that's in it for the right reasons. I've never wanted to be a head coach, so I really can't talk from that point of view. You've got to be pretty bulletproof mentally and have a bit of a skin of armor, be able to let things wash over you all the time around that. For me, looking at where I coach, the majority of my time as assistant coach, it's getting joy out of seeing people improve and learn. That's the great thing I see. If I work with a young player and then he gets out on the field, has a couple of games where he might really struggle, and then you see something click and you see the joy and the result of that effort, that for me is just, there's nothing better than seeing that. And that's what I love about coaching. And that's where I get the joy out of coaching. And I think that's where I'll never be able to really let that go at any level. Just that feeling of doing that. I say head coach bit, people are going to have that, the whole idea of that 24 hours a day where you're often not coaching. You're doing all the other things bar coaching, dealing with personalities, dealing with people getting over selections, dealing with all the other stuff that goes
media,
with it,
board
and
members,
the media and all that sort of stuff. They can have that, and good on them. They get the big bickies for doing that stuff. But for me, it's all about that. If I can help someone do that and get a little bit better, and if I'm not doing that, I always like to go back and go, why? What did I do wrong? And often it'll be something that I've done, and I've realised that I've just talked at them, and not actually gone in. And I'm still sort of able to get in there and feel that pressure and get, put my head in there, as long as there's not too many players behind them, which is always nice, that feeling of that. And, and you get to feel when they release pressure, when they're good, and be able to feedback. As soon as you feel that they've got you in something, you go, that's the feeling there. Do that again. And you're rewarding that. The other thing, I guess, if I can leave the coaching bit of one thing, is that I'm technologically pretty challenged. My goal as a coach, and I try to get the players to do it, is every time you do something good at training. So if you're being filmed at training or in a game and you do something really good, clip that. I used to sit down with players at Super Rugby level, and some of the players would come in and I go, how was the game? And they'd have 6 points. And every one of them was showing me how a shit thing that they did, and a mistake that they made. And I said, oh, what about these 5 or 6 scrums here where you were really good? Oh, I'm not worried about them, I'm worried about these. And my feedback to them was, no, forget those ones. Go and watch over and over and over again the 6 times you did it perfectly, and drill that into your head and remember that feeling of that. And if you could put together a 5-minute video that you watch, on the day of every game, of you just doing things well, clean out, ball carry, tackle thing, build your ego up and just watch yourself in those motor patterns of doing things correctly. Forget the other stuff. The other stuff is just beating you up.
That's such great advice. Such great advice, mate. Like I've noticed with the guys I'm coaching at the moment, you go, what do you think of that? Put it out to them. It's almost always things that they could do better or negative, rather than going, well, no, we got the line out drill. That was pretty good. The initial punch was good. oh, that more was, they don't tend to focus on the good. And I think getting the balance between going, geez, I did that well, but I could do that better is really
I think
important.
that's what they expect to that they're expecting
Yeah.
is like they're expecting you that you want to hear what they've done wrong and what you can help them with. I think the more they can go without ignoring it, they go, okay, I'm inconsistent. I had some crap ones there. I've got to get that out of me. I thought I did these ones well.
Yeah.
And you go, yep, you did those ones well. Let's concentrate on those. Let's get more of those and less of those. And let's work on the reason that one that was inconsistent or you didn't cope with that. Let's work on getting that right and focus on that. And then that goes to the wayside. I think you do get those guys that never admit that they've done anything wrong. You get the other ones,
Yeah.
that it's everyone else's fault. So you don't want everyone doing that. It's more getting them to say, yeah, I made some mistakes. Yeah, I got that wrong. But let's now really focusing on what works well and what does right and how we do that right. And let's drill that goodness and think about that. So you get in the next game and you're wanting to go into the game and dominate. You're not going in there going, oh, I hope I don't move my foot. If you go in there going, I hope I don't move my right foot on the engagement, or whatever, and then all of a sudden you see your tight head, that's in his head, and as he's hitting, he's moving that right foot, and it's he's got it off the ground at the point of contact, and or immediately after contact he's shifting it back in, and he's lost his base because he's been thinking about that the whole week.
Yeah.
So I think it's a hard mentality to get, but I think if we drill those things in, that feeling of doing things well is the real key.
Mate, I feel like I could talk scrums with you for hours, and maybe we'll do a number 2 at some point. But I've got one final question for you.
Yeah.
What advice would you give 18-year-old Andrew Blades?
It's a great one. I think what I would give myself is you retired for a long time. You get a small window at playing this amazing game with great mates, amazing experiences. So, when you train consistently, work on the things that are going to make a difference for you. Don't shy away from them. I think if I look back on my own career, the one thing I would regret at that was that there were better guys carrying the ball than me in the team. And often, I had the opportunity to carry, I'd tip onto the bloke that was better, or rather than if I don't go and do that 20 times a day, work on my footwork into contact, work on that, that's my game going to the next level. I think that's probably the things that I look at is where could I have become, Australia's best tight at the time earlier, where could I have become a better prop from a worldwide point of view. So if I was talking to myself, I'd go, don't shy away from it. Work on that ball carry. Work on the things you're not good at a scrum point of view. This is a weird thing to say, but I'm left-handed, so I was very left side focused on my scrummaging, which meant that because I was a bit more coordinated on my left side, I spent a lot of my time burying my left shoulder into that seam, and I let loose head sort of almost come at me because I was weaker on that right side. Then I see a lot of tight heads now who are right, so they spend a whole time cranking with their right arm and doing all this stuff there, and they put so much pressure on themselves because they've got two blokes underneath them and working at them the whole time. And I'd say to them, okay, let's use that strength you got on your right side, but let's really develop that coordination of that left side of your chest and what you do with that to create those, to let you break the seam of that scrum, let you work into that space where you get back to a one-on-one, and or you can create that seam between the loose head and the hooker. So I think not shying away from the things that are going to make you a better player are super important. And if I was going to go back and start from scratch, I said do a lot of the things the same. Like work hard in the gym, probably stay off the piss a little bit more, the drink a little bit more than I did. But I think that was probably the thing that held me back a lot, was those other parts of the game that I just went, oh, well, I'm going to become a really, really, really good scrummager technically. And I won't worry too much about that because I'm not good at it. I think I'd go back and I'd try and be better in those areas.
Bladesy, I'm so grateful for your time, mate. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the hell out of this. I absolutely took some really good things that I'm going to use in my own coaching out of this, and I think other people will as well, mate. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Good on you, mate.